My name is Paige. I'm 29 years old, and I never imagined I would be packing up my childhood bedroom while my mother watched coldly from the doorway. For 4 years, I had lived with her after Dad died, helping in every way I could. Then my sister Stephanie arrived with her husband Daniel, claiming they needed family support. That night, Mom delivered her ultimatum: you can take the guest room or move out. Stephanie appeared behind her, adding cheerfully, "Great, if you're out by the weekend." I left. Their smug satisfaction lasted until everything fell apart without me. If you're enjoying this story, let me know where you're watching from and hit that subscribe button for more real-life family drama. Before everything imploded, I had built a stable, if not entirely fulfilling life for myself in my childhood home. 4 years earlier, my father, William, had died suddenly of a heart attack. The loss devastated our family, but especially me. Dad and I had always been incredibly close. He was the one who understood my quirky sense of humor, encouraged my ambitions, and always made me feel valued. My relationship with my mother, Margaret, was different. Where Dad was warm and expressive, Mom was practical and emotionally reserved. She and my sister Stephanie shared a special bond that often left me feeling like an outsider in my own family. After Dad's death, I made the decision to move back into our family home in suburban Boston. It was a beautiful colonial-style house with a wraparound porch where Dad and I used to sit, drinking lemonade in the summer. Every corner held memories of him. The house technically belonged to both Stephanie and me after his passing, with Mom having lifetime rights to live there. At the time, it seemed logical that I would be the one to move back. Stephanie had relocated to Chicago 5 years earlier with her husband Daniel, establishing what she constantly described as a thriving life there. I had been working as a marketing executive at a prominent firm in downtown Boston. Moving home required significant career adjustments. I negotiated a remote position with my company, accepting a 15% pay cut in the process. My boss was understanding, but made it clear this would likely slow my career progression. Still, family comes first, right? At least, that's what I believed. The financial arrangements seemed fair at first. I paid half the household bills, handled all home maintenance, and took charge of managing Mom's increasing medical needs. At 67, she was relatively independent, but struggled with high blood pressure and early arthritis. I drove her to doctor appointments, managed her medications, and made sure she followed her treatment plans. Our weekly routine became predictable. Mondays, I worked while doing laundry between conference calls. Tuesdays included grocery shopping after work. Wednesdays were for Mom's various medical appointments. Thursdays, I cleaned the house. Weekends were filled with yard work and home repairs. The old house constantly needed something fixed or updated. Dad had always handled these things, and now they fell to me. I learned plumbing basics from YouTube videos and became surprisingly proficient at fixing leaky faucets and unclogging drains. Gradually, my social circle dwindled. Friends stopped calling after I repeatedly declined invitations, too exhausted or busy with household responsibilities. The only friend who remained consistently in my life was Tara, who lived in an apartment downtown and regularly insisted I take breaks from caregiving. "You're being taken for granted," she would tell me during our monthly dinner dates. "Your mom is completely capable of hiring help, you know." I always defended my choices, explaining that this arrangement was temporary, just until Mom adjusted to life without Dad. My childhood bedroom became my sanctuary. I had redecorated slightly, but kept many elements from my youth. The walls were still the soft blue Dad had painted when I was 12. My collection of vintage cameras still lined the bookshelf, a hobby he had encouraged. The window overlooked the backyard garden we had tended together. At night, I often sat on the window seat, looking at the stars and imagining him somewhere watching over us. Meanwhile, Stephanie's presence in our lives became increasingly distant. Our weekly phone calls dwindled to monthly, then to major holidays. When she did call, she spoke mostly with Mom. Their conversations were filled with laughter and inside jokes that excluded me. Even when I was sitting right there, I noticed these calls becoming more frequent about 2 months before everything changed, though Stephanie seemed tense during them, often stepping away to speak privately. Mom's behavior toward me had also been subtly shifting. Her usual emotional distance grew more pronounced. My efforts around the house received fewer thanks. My suggestions were more often dismissed, and she began making small comments about how I was still figuring things out at my age, despite my stable career and significant contributions to our household. The last normal week before everything changed, I overheard Mom on the phone with Stephanie, her voice unusually animated. "Of course we can make it work. Family comes first." When I asked about the call, she vaguely mentioned Stephanie might visit soon, but quickly changed the subject. Looking back, I should have recognized the warning signs, but I was too caught up in the daily routines of our life to see the approaching storm. Thursday evening started like any other. I was in the kitchen making chicken parmesan, Mom's favorite, while she watched her evening game shows in the living room. The spring air flowed through the open windows, carrying the scent of the lilac bushes Dad had planted years ago. I had just put the chicken in the oven when the doorbell rang. "Can you get that?" Mom called from the living room, though she was actually closer to the door than I was. Wiping my hands on a dish towel, I made my way to the front door. When I opened it, I froze. There stood Stephanie and Daniel, surrounded by what looked like a mountain of expensive luggage. 4 large suitcases, 2 carry-ons, and multiple shopping bags crowded our front porch. "Surprise!" Stephanie exclaimed, throwing her arms around me in an embrace that felt more performative than genuine. At 32, my sister still looked like she had stepped out of a magazine. Her blonde hair was perfectly highlighted, her designer jeans probably cost more than my monthly car payment, and diamond studs glittered in her ears. Daniel stood awkwardly behind her, offering a small wave. "Hey, Paige, long time no see." He was tall and conventionally handsome in that investment banker way, with carefully styled dark hair and an expensive watch gleaming on his wrist. I had always found him pleasant enough, if somewhat bland. "Stephanie!" Mom's voice came from behind me, filled with more excitement than I had heard from her in months. She practically pushed past me to embrace my sister. "Why didn't you tell me you were coming?" "We wanted to surprise you," Stephanie said, her voice taking on the slightly childish tone she always used with Mom. "We need a little family time right now." I stood back, watching as Mom ushered them in, completely forgetting about me, still standing in the doorway. I was left to deal with the luggage, struggling to drag in the heavy cases while they disappeared into the living room, already deep in conversation. The amount of luggage struck me as excessive for what should have been a short visit. By the time I had hauled everything into the foyer and returned to the kitchen to check on dinner, they were laughing together like I had never even been in the room. I extended dinner for 3 to 4, adding more pasta to stretch the meal. "So, what brings you home?" I asked as we finally sat down to eat. "Is everything okay in Chicago?" I noticed Daniel and Stephanie exchange a quick glance before she answered. "Everything's fine," Stephanie said, dismissively. "We just needed a break. The corporate world is so demanding, not that you would understand with your remote setup." The slight dig was typical Stephanie, always finding ways to minimize my career achievements. "Actually, working remotely comes with its own challenges," I started to explain, but Mom interrupted. "Stephanie just closed a huge design project for a celebrity client. She was featured in Chicago Home magazine." This was news to me. Last I had heard, Stephanie's interior design business was just getting off the ground. "That's great," I said sincerely. "Which celebrity?" "Oh, I signed an NDA. Can't share details." She smoothly changed the subject, launching into stories about their supposedly glamorous life in Chicago. Throughout dinner, I noticed several inconsistencies in her stories, and the tension between her and Daniel was palpable. When she mentioned their beautiful condo overlooking Lake Michigan, Daniel seemed to flinch slightly. The entire meal, Mom barely looked at me, completely enraptured by Stephanie's presence. It was a familiar dynamic from our childhood, but somehow more painful now after 4 years of it being just the two of us. After dinner, I started clearing dishes while they continued chatting. "Let Paige handle the cleanup," Mom said when Stephanie offered token assistance. "She has a system." Later that evening, as I was finishing loading the dishwasher, I overheard Daniel and Stephanie having a heated, whispered argument in the guest bathroom. "We can't keep this up forever," he hissed. "We need to tell them the truth." Not yet, Stephanie responded. Mom will help us, but we need to do this my way. I moved away before they could catch me eavesdropping, troubled by what I had heard. Something was definitely wrong. Despite their outward appearance of success, cracks were beginning to show. That night, around 11, I was already in bed reading when my bedroom door opened without a knock. Mom stood there, her expression unreadable, while Stephanie hovered just behind her in the hallway. We need to discuss sleeping arrangements, Mom said, her tone businesslike. Stephanie and Daniel need a proper bedroom while they're here. Okay, I said, setting my book down. How long are they staying? The guest room has a queen bed. That's not suitable, she replied. They need more space. They'll be taking your room. I stared at her, certain I had misheard. My room? But where would I sleep? You can take the guest room or move out. She delivered the ultimatum that would change everything. Her voice was cold, detached, as though we were discussing a business transaction rather than my home of 4 years, not to mention my entire childhood before that. Stephanie stepped forward, her expression sympathetic, but her eyes gleaming with something that looked disturbingly like triumph. Great, if you're out by the weekend, she added cheerfully. We have a lot of things being shipped from Chicago. I looked between them, waiting for someone to laugh, to say it was all a joke, but their expressions remained serious. Mom, I said, my voice shaking slightly, I've been living here for 4 years, helping with everything. I pay half the bills, I take care of the house, your appointments. Stephanie needs your room. She's going through something difficult right now and needs family support. And I don't count as family who deserves support? I asked, hurt blooming in my chest. Don't be dramatic, Paige, Mom sighed. It's just a bedroom. You can use the guest room. Stephanie and Daniel need more space than you do. That night, I moved my essential items to the guest room, a tiny space with an ancient twin bed that sagged in the middle and smelled faintly of mothballs. I lay awake for hours, staring at the unfamiliar ceiling, trying to understand what was happening to my family and why my years of support and sacrifice seemed to count for nothing. I woke early the next morning after a fitful sleep, my back aching from the lumpy bed. The sun was barely up when I heard voices coming from the kitchen below. Stephanie and Daniel were having what they thought was a private conversation, their words drifting up through the old house's air vents. She has no idea how perfect this is working out, Stephanie was saying, her voice smug. I told you Mom always picks me. She always has. What about the money situation? Daniel asked, his voice tense. We need to figure something out soon. The credit card companies keep calling. Mom will help, Stephanie replied confidently. She always does. And little Miss Perfect Paige is so responsible. She's probably been bankrolling this place anyway. Their voices faded as they moved away from the vent, but I had heard enough to raise my suspicions further. Money situation? Credit card companies calling? This didn't sound like the successful power couple Stephanie had been portraying. I tried to focus on work that day, but I missed an important deadline as family tension distracted me. My boss was understanding, but concerned, mentioning that my performance had been slipping lately. After a difficult video call, I decided to confront Stephanie directly. I found her alone in the kitchen, scrolling through her phone while drinking the expensive specialty coffee she had insisted Mom buy that morning. We need to talk, I said, closing the kitchen door behind me. What's really going on, Stephanie? Why are you and Daniel really here? Stephanie looked up, annoyance flashing across her face, before she composed it into a neutral expression. I told you, we're just visiting, taking a break. With enough luggage for a month and mysterious shipments coming from Chicago? I pressed. I overheard you and Daniel talking about money problems. Is that what this is about? Something in Stephanie's carefully maintained facade cracked slightly. Fine. The economy's been tough. Daniel's company went through some restructuring, and my design business had a few setbacks. We needed to regroup, that's all. So why not just tell us that? Why the act? And why do you need my bedroom? Because we're staying a while, okay? She snapped, her composed mask slipping further. And it's not like you're doing anything important with your life anyway. You've been living rent-free like a child for 4 years. The accusation stung, especially because it was untrue. Rent-free? I paid half of all the bills. I managed the entire household. I took Mom to every medical appointment, handled all the maintenance, did all the shopping and cleaning. What exactly have you contributed from Chicago? Stephanie's expression flickered with something that looked like guilt before hardening again. Well, it's not like you have your own family to take care of. Daniel and I have a certain lifestyle to maintain. Mom understands that. What does that mean? I pressed. Stephanie examined her manicure, avoiding my eyes. Mom's been sending us money, if you must know. She said it was from her savings, but I'm guessing it might have been your rent money. Not my problem how she manages her finances. The revelation hit me like a physical blow. For 4 years, I had faithfully paid my share of expenses, believing we were partners in maintaining the household, while Mom had been redirecting those funds to support Stephanie's supposedly successful life in Chicago. I found Mom in the garden later that afternoon, tending to her roses. These were tasks I usually handled, but she had suddenly taken an interest now that Stephanie was home. Is it true? I asked without preamble. Have you been sending Stephanie the money I've been contributing to this household? Mom straightened slowly, brushing dirt from her gloves. Her expression was defensive, not guilty. What I do with family resources is my business, Paige. It's my money. It's money I earned while working full-time and taking care of this house and you. Stephanie has needs, Mom replied, as if that explained everything. She and Daniel have a certain lifestyle to maintain. You've always been more practical, like your father. She said this last part like it was a flaw. So you've been lying to me for years, taking my contributions while letting me believe we were partners in this? Don't be so dramatic. Family helps family. Stephanie has always had greater potential than you. She just needs support to reach it. The casual cruelty of her words left me speechless. In that moment, I saw with perfect clarity the dynamic that had defined our family for decades. Stephanie was the golden child, whose needs always came first. I was the reliable one, expected to sacrifice without complaint, my efforts taken for granted. I see, I said finally, a strange calm settling over me. Well, this certainly clarifies things. That evening, I called Tara, tears slipping through my words as I explained the situation. Stay with me, she offered immediately. My spare room is yours for as long as you need it. I've been telling you for years they're taking advantage of you. The next day, I began packing in earnest, not just the few essentials I'd moved to the guest room, but everything that mattered to me from my childhood bedroom. Photo albums Dad and I had made, the vintage camera collection he had helped me start, books we had read together. As I carefully wrapped each memory, I could almost hear his voice. Know your worth, Paige Bear. Don't let anyone make you feel small. Daniel found me packing in what was now their room, awkwardly hovering in the doorway. I'm sorry about all this, he said quietly, glancing over his shoulder as if afraid Stephanie might appear. Things haven't been great for us, but this isn't right. Then why are you going along with it? I asked, carefully placing my father's watch into a box. It's complicated, he sighed. Stephanie doesn't handle failure well, never has. I don't either, I replied, sealing another box with finality. But I'd rather leave than stay where I'm not valued. By Saturday morning, my car was packed with everything I could fit. Mom watched from the front door as I carried out a small plant Dad had given me years ago. You're being ridiculous, she said. Where will you go? What will you do? I have friends, I replied civilly. And I've been managing just fine for years. I'm sure you and Stephanie will figure things out. You'll be back when you run out of options, she predicted, coldly. You were always too sensitive, just like your father. I paused at the bottom of the steps, looking back at the woman I had supported for 4 years. That's the nicest thing you've said to me in years, I told her. And no, Mom, I won't be back. Not like this. As I drove away from my childhood home, tears blurred my vision before I wiped them away. Something inside me had broken, but something stronger had finally been set free. Saturday morning dawned clear and crisp as I loaded the last of my belongings into the car. The driveway was silent, except for birdsong and the occasional passing car. I had chosen to leave early, hoping to avoid a dramatic scene with Stephanie or another cold dismissal from Mom. As I placed the final box in the trunk, I noticed Mom watching from the living room window. Her expression was unreadable behind the glass. Not sad, not concerned, simply observing. Stephanie was nowhere to be seen, likely still asleep in what was once my bedroom. Just before closing the trunk, I realized something was missing. The family photo albums. I searched the front seat, the back seat, under larger boxes, nothing. With a sinking feeling, I realized they must still be inside. Reluctantly, I returned and found them neatly stacked on the hall table. Had I forgotten them, or had someone removed them from my boxes? I couldn't be sure, but seeing them there felt like a final, small betrayal. These were the physical records of my history, my childhood with Dad, our family before everything fractured. I gathered them silently and returned to my car. Mom had moved to the front door by then, her hand extended. "The spare key," she said. I removed it from my keychain and placed it in her palm without a word. She nodded once, as if completing a business transaction. "Your mail will be forwarded." "Goodbye, Mom," I answered, pausing for any hint of warmth or regret. There was none. "You know where we are if you need us," she replied. Close, but not the same as, "You're welcome back." The drive to Tara's apartment took 30 minutes, each mile pulling me farther from my past and closer to an uncertain but hopeful future. At stoplights, I found myself taking deep breaths, alternating between tears and bursts of unexpected liberation. Tara was waiting outside her building when I arrived, immediately helping me unload. Her third-floor walk-up in downtown Boston was tiny compared to the family home I had left, but she had cleared a space in her closet and bathroom for me. The spare room barely fit a twin bed and dresser, yet it felt like home more than anywhere I'd been in years. "Welcome to independence," she said, handing me a glass of wine once everything was inside. It was barely noon, but the day already felt several years long. "I can't believe I actually left," I said, sinking onto her couch. 4 years of your life just over." 4 years of being taken for granted, Tara corrected gently. "This has been coming for a long time, Paige." That first night away from home was a strange mix of emotions. I lay in the unfamiliar bed, listening to city sounds so different from my quiet suburban neighborhood. There was grief for what I had lost, but also an unexpected sense of possibility. For the first time in years, I had no one to care for but myself. Sunday was spent organizing my minimal living space, creating some semblance of order in my drastically downsized life. Tara helped me hang a few pictures, arranged my clothes in the small dresser, and made room on her bookshelves for my most treasured volumes. "It's temporary," she assured me, "just until you figure out your next steps. No rush." By evening, my phone had remained silent. No call from Mom to check if I had arrived safely, no message from Stephanie showing any remorse. I wasn't surprised, but the confirmation of my dispensability still stung. Monday morning brought the first contact from my former household. A text from Mom appeared as I was preparing for my workday. "Where do we keep the furnace filter replacements? The heat is making strange noises." No acknowledgement of my departure, no questions about my well-being, just a practical inquiry about house maintenance that had always been my responsibility. I didn't respond immediately, focusing instead on my meetings. With fewer distractions and obligations, I found my productivity rising dramatically. I completed a major project proposal 2 days ahead of schedule and received positive feedback from my boss for the first time in months. Tuesday brought the first call from Stephanie. "Hey, do you have the password to the family photo cloud storage? Mom can't remember it, and there are some pictures we want to print." Again, no mention of my leaving, no acknowledgement of the situation, just a practical request as if nothing had changed. I provided the password, but kept the conversation brief and professional. That evening, I discovered something disturbing while reviewing my accounts. Mom had removed me as an authorized user on the family credit card, which I had used for household purchases and her medical expenses. My online access to the family bank account had also been revoked. They were systematically cutting financial ties while still expecting my practical support. Wednesday, I reached out to Jackson, a college friend who now worked as a property lawyer. Over lunch, I explained the situation with the house. So legally, you and your sister both own the house, with your mother having lifetime rights to live in it, he clarified, taking notes. That's what Dad's will specified, I confirmed, realizing how little I had involved myself in the financial details. Jackson looked concerned. You can't actually force you out of your ownership interest, Paige. Even if you're not living there, you still have legal rights. Have you been documenting your financial contributions to the household? Fortunately, I had. Years of handling household finances had made me methodical about record keeping. I promised to send Jackson copies for review. As the first week progressed, I began recognizing how much of myself I had surrendered to caregiving. Friends I hadn't seen in months welcomed me back eagerly. I joined a Thursday night book club I'd always been too busy for. On Friday, I had dinner with colleagues without worrying about getting home to prepare Mom's medication. Gradually, I was remembering who Paige was, beyond caretaker and daughter. The realization was both liberating and painful, showing me how much of my identity had been consumed by family responsibilities. The weekend brought another wave of texts from Mom and Stephanie about household problems. The garbage disposal wasn't working, the garden hose leaked, the internet was slow. Each message assumed I would provide solutions from afar, with no acknowledgement that these matters were no longer mine to handle. I replied briefly, suggesting service professionals and giving numbers when I had them. Daniel showed up unexpectedly at Tara's apartment the next evening. I was surprised to find him standing awkwardly in the hallway when I answered the door. "How did you find me?" I asked, not inviting him in. "Stephanie has your friend on social media," he explained, looking uncomfortable. "Can we talk just for a few minutes?" Reluctantly, I agreed to meet him at the coffee shop downstairs. Once seated, with coffees neither of us touched, Daniel's carefully maintained facade finally cracked. "Things are bad, Paige," he admitted, rubbing his face tiredly. "Really bad. The truth is, I lost my job 6 months ago, not because of restructuring." On to the 10th day after leaving, the first urgent call came from home. I was in the middle of a work presentation when my phone lit up with Mom's number. I let it go to voicemail, finishing the meeting before checking the message. "Paige, the heating system is making terrible noises, and there's no heat. It's freezing in here. Call me back immediately." Boston's spring had turned unexpectedly cold, with temperatures dropping into the 30s overnight. The old furnace had always been temperamental, requiring maintenance routines I had handled for years. When I called back, Mom answered on the first ring. "Finally," she said, "the heat has been out for hours. You need to tell us what to do." "Have you checked the pilot light?" I asked, automatically, slipping into problem-solving mode. "Daniel tried, but he couldn't figure it out. Stephanie is freezing. Can you come over?" The request gave me pause. After everything that had happened, they still expected me to show up and fix things, as if nothing had changed. "Mom, I'm not living there anymore. Remember? You might need to call a heating service." "A service will cost hundreds of dollars," she protested. "You've always handled these things." Yes, I did. That was one of the many ways I contributed to the household. But since I've moved out, you'll need to find alternatives. I'm sure Daniel can figure it out with a quick internet search, or there's the HVAC card in the kitchen drawer. The silence on the other end was heavy with surprise. She had genuinely expected me to drop everything and come running. "I see," she said finally. "Well, we'll manage somehow." "I hope you get it sorted quickly," I replied sincerely. "Let me know if you need the company's number." After hanging up, I felt a complex mix of guilt and vindication. Part of me still wanted to help, to be the dependable daughter I had always been, but another part recognized this as a necessary boundary, one that would never be established if I continued rescuing them from every difficulty. The following day, I had coffee with Nancy, an older neighbor from my mom's street, who had always been kind to me. She had reached out after hearing about my sudden move, concerned about what had happened. "I have to say, I'm not entirely surprised," Nancy said, after I explained the situation. "There has been talk around the neighborhood." "Talk about what?" I asked. Nancy looked uncomfortable. "About Stephanie and Daniel. Patricia's son works at the same firm where Daniel was employed. Apparently, he didn't just leave his job. There were allegations. Something about funds being misappropriated." This was significantly different from Stephanie's vague explanation about company restructuring. "Allegations of embezzlement?" I clarified, shocked. "I don't know the details," Nancy admitted, "but it wasn't an amicable departure. And Stephanie's design business? No one in Chicago's design community seems to have heard of it. Patricia's daughter is an interior designer there, and said it never got off the ground. The picture becoming clearer was disturbing. Stephanie and Daniel hadn't just experienced setbacks, they had fabricated much of their supposed success. Their financial situation was likely far worse than they had admitted. There were accusations, accounting irregularities. I didn't do what they claimed, but I couldn't fight it without exposing other issues. "What issues?" I pressed. "Trading using insider information," he said quietly. "Nothing that could be proven, but enough that I had to leave quietly. There was no severance package." "And Stephanie's design business?" He laughed humorlessly. "Never got a single client. She spent thousands setting up a beautiful office, created a website, printed business cards, but couldn't land projects. She blamed the economy, the Chicago design scene, everything except her lack of experience or portfolio. The full picture was worse than I had imagined." "So you've had no income for 6 months?" "None," he confirmed. "We've been living on credit cards, draining our savings, and yes, the money your mother has been sending. Our condo in Chicago is in foreclosure. We had to leave before we were formally evicted. Most of our furniture and belongings are in storage. We can't afford to keep paying for it. And let me guess, Stephanie hasn't told Mom the full extent of this?" "She can't admit failure," Daniel said, bitterness creeping into his voice. "Never could. She told your mother, 'We're just experiencing temporary setbacks and need a little family support while we relocate our successful business to Boston.'" I sat back, processing this information. "Why are you telling me this now?" "Because everything's falling apart without you there," he said simply. "Your mother doesn't know how to manage the house. Stephanie certainly doesn't. I'm trying, but it's clear you were handling far more than anyone realized. Stephanie won't admit it, but we need your help." "I offered help for 4 years," I reminded him, "and was taken for granted, lied to, and ultimately pushed out of my own home." "I know," he acknowledged, "and I'm sorry for my part in that. But is there any way you could just help with some of the house maintenance issues, for your mother's sake?" His plea sparked a mixture of sympathy and resolve. "I can't go back to how things were, Daniel. You all need to figure this out without me." As we parted, I felt a strange new confidence. For the first time, I wasn't the one seeking approval or assistance. My independence, forced though it had been, was becoming a source of strength rather than isolation. The following week brought an unexpected development at work. My boss called me into a virtual meeting to discuss a potential promotion. "Your work has been exceptional these past few weeks. Whatever personal issues were affecting your performance before seem to have resolved. We're considering you for the senior marketing strategist position opening next month." The irony wasn't lost on me. Only by being pushed out of my caretaking role had I been able to refocus on my career and growth. Sometimes losing what you think you need opens the door to what you actually deserve. 3 weeks after moving out, I received a bank statement that raised new concerns. There had been a significant withdrawal from my personal savings account using a check written weeks earlier that I had forgotten about. Mom had asked me to write it for property taxes, but the amount now seemed excessive. I made a note to look into the property tax records for the house, wondering what other financial irregularities might exist beneath the surface of our family dynamics. Exactly 3 weeks after my departure, close to midnight, my phone erupted with Stephanie's ringtone. I almost didn't answer, but the late hours suggested a genuine emergency. "Hello?" I said cautiously. "Paige, you need to come home right now. The pipe in the upstairs bathroom burst and there's water everywhere. Everything is ruined." I could hear rushing water in the background and Mom's voice frantically calling for towels. Despite everything, my heart raced with concern for the old house I still loved. "Have you turned off the main water valve?" I asked, already reaching for my shoes. "We can't find it," Stephanie cried. "Daniel's looking in the basement, but water is already coming through the ceiling downstairs." "It's behind the storage shelves in the northeast corner of the basement. I'll be there as soon as I can." The drive to my former home took 20 minutes, each mile filled with determination and apprehension. When I arrived, the front yard was lit by every light in the house blazing. I didn't bother knocking, instead using my remaining key to let myself in. The scene inside was worse than I imagined. Water had poured through the upstairs bathroom floor, saturating the living room ceiling below. A large section had already collapsed, dumping soggy drywall across the furniture. The hardwood floors were covered in standing water, and the air was thick with dampness and mold. Daniel emerged from the basement, soaking wet. "I found the main valve and shut it off," he reported, pushing wet hair from his eyes. But not before significant damage was done. Mom appeared from the kitchen looking thinner and more disheveled than when I had left. Her normally perfect hair was unkempt, and she wore a stained house dress I had never seen before. "Paige, thank goodness you're here." Before I could respond, Stephanie came rushing down the stairs in her pajamas. "The carpet in the hallway is completely soaked, and there's water coming through the light fixture in the guest bathroom." She stopped when she saw me, her expression a mixture of relief and embarrassment. "You came?" "Of course I came. This is an emergency." I began issuing instructions, slipping naturally back into the role of household manager. "Daniel, check all electrical fixtures for water exposure. Stephanie, move valuable items out of the wet areas. Mom, call the insurance company first thing in the morning. I'll see what I can do about the immediate water." For the next several hours, we worked together, salvaging what we could, using every towel in the house to soak up water, and shifting furniture to dry areas. By 3 a.m., we had done all that was possible without professional help. "The restoration company can't come until tomorrow afternoon," Mom said, after making an emergency call. "They said to rent dehumidifiers if we have them." "There's one in the garage," I said, "and another in the basement storage room." I realized none of them even knew this basic information about the house I had maintained for years. As we gathered, exhausted, in the relatively dry kitchen, the full extent of the household's decline became impossible to ignore. Dishes piled in the sink, mail and papers cluttered every surface, the trash overflowed, and the floor was sticky beneath my feet. This went beyond water damage. It spoke to weeks of neglect. "We need to talk," I said finally, looking at their tired faces around the table. "About what?" Stephanie asked defensively. "About what's really going on here," I replied firmly. "All of it. No more half-truths or convenient stories. It's time for complete honesty." Mom looked away uncomfortably. Daniel stared at his hands. Stephanie's chin lifted in defiance, though her eyes held unmistakable fear. "Fine," I continued, when no one spoke. "I'll start. I know about Daniel's job loss due to allegations of financial misconduct. I know Stephanie's design business never actually existed beyond a website and business cards. I know you're facing foreclosure in Chicago and financial ruin, and I suspect you came here not for a temporary visit, but because you had nowhere else to go. The silence that followed confirmed everything. Finally, Daniel spoke. It wasn't exactly financial misconduct. It was a gambling problem that got out of hand. I used company funds temporarily, intending to replace them after a big win, but the win never came. Gambling? Mom repeated, staring at him. Stephanie told me there was a corporate restructuring. There's more, I continued, turning to Stephanie. You've been portraying a successful life in Chicago while drowning in debt. You convinced Mom to send you money I provided for household expenses just to keep up appearances. We were going to pay it back, Stephanie insisted, tears welling. Once things turned around. And when exactly was that supposed to happen? You have no jobs, no savings, massive debt, and have now lost your Chicago home. This isn't a temporary setback, it's complete financial collapse. She's lying, Stephanie cried, turning desperately to Mom. Tell me she's lying about sending us my rent money. Mom's face crumpled, the first genuine emotion I had seen from her in years. I needed to help your sister. She and Daniel have a certain lifestyle to maintain. With what money? I pressed. Because I've been looking into our finances since I left. The property taxes are 3 years behind. There are multiple liens against the house. Your retirement account is nearly depleted. Where did all that money go? Daniel looked at Stephanie, who began to sob. Shopping, luxury goods, designer clothes, expensive restaurants, keeping up appearances while everything collapsed around us. And gambling, I added, turning to him. How much have you lost? He named a figure that made Mom gasp. Most of it on sports betting, some on online poker. It started small, just a way to make extra money when my bonuses were cut. Then it became something else. I turned to Mom, whose shocked expression confirmed she hadn't known the extent of the situation. And your health. Mom, you missed your cardiology appointment. Have you even been taking your medications? I got confused without your reminders, and I ran out of some of them. The pharmacy said the insurance was declined when I tried to refill them. Because the premiums haven't been paid, I realized, something that had been my responsibility before I left. For the first time, I saw genuine regret in my mother's eyes. I didn't understand how much you were handling, she said quietly, not until you were gone. And what was the real plan here? I asked, looking between Stephanie and Daniel. Because you didn't arrive with temporary visitor luggage. Stephanie and Daniel exchanged glances before she finally spoke. We thought we could move back here permanently, live with Mom, rebuild our finances. Eventually, she trailed off. Eventually, take over the house, I finished for her, push me out completely. It wasn't like that, she protested weakly, but her eyes told a different story. I stood up from the table, surveying the 3 people whose actions had forced me from my home. Well, your plan worked in part. You did push me out. But it seems you overlooked how much you were all depending on me. As if to emphasize my point, a loud crash sounded from the living room as another section of the water-damaged ceiling collapsed. What do we do now? Mom asked suddenly, looking every one of her 67 years. First, you deal with this water damage and make the house livable again, I said firmly. Then you face reality, all of you. No more pretending, no more hiding from the truth of your situations. I turned to leave, but Mom's voice stopped me. Paige, wait, we need you. I need you. Please come home. For a brief moment, I felt the pull of my lifelong role as the responsible one, the fixer, the caretaker. Then I remembered the cold dismissal, the years of thankless work, the ultimate betrayal of being pushed out of my own home. I can't come back to how things were, I said finally. That life is over for me. But I'll help arrange the restoration company tomorrow morning, and I'll make sure your medications are refilled, Mom. Beyond that, you all need to figure out your own solutions. As I drove back to Tara's apartment in the early morning hours, I felt an unexpected lightness despite the exhaustion. For the first time, I had faced my family's dysfunction head-on,
spoken my truth, and walked away with my boundaries intact.
Something fundamental had shifted, not just in their perception of me, but in my perception of myself. The water damage crisis marked a turning point for our family. In the days that followed, I maintained emotional distance while offering limited practical help. I coordinated with the restoration company, ensured Mom's prescriptions were refilled, and connected Daniel with a contractor friend who needed temporary labor. 1 week after the flood, I arranged a meeting with Jackson, my lawyer friend, at a neutral coffee shop near the family home. Mom, Stephanie, Daniel, and I sat together as Jackson outlined our legal and financial realities. The house is jointly owned by Paige and Stephanie, with your mother having lifetime rights to occupy it, he explained, laying out documents. However, the delinquent property taxes have created liens that must be addressed immediately to avoid foreclosure. Foreclosure? Mom repeated, paling visibly. Unfortunately, yes, Jackson confirmed. Additionally, several unpaid utility bills and lapsed insurance premiums make the situation precarious at best. Over the next 2 hours, we created a formal agreement assigning clear responsibilities. Mom would remain in the house, but with defined household management duties. Stephanie and Daniel would move into a small apartment across town, begin financial counseling, and adjust to their drastically reduced circumstances. I would retain my share of ownership, but continue living independently. As we prepared to leave, Mom asked to speak with me privately. We walked to a quiet corner of the cafe. "I owe you an apology," she said, her voice uncharacteristically hesitant. "A substantial one. For years, I took you for granted while favoring Stephanie. I convinced myself it was because she needed more support, but the truth is I found it easier to give in to her demands than acknowledge her flaws. And yours were always on display because you were actually dealing with real life instead of creating an illusion. And I was punished for it?" I added quietly. "Yes," Mom admitted. "You're so much like your father. Practical, reliable, honest. After he died, it was easier to focus on Stephanie because she didn't remind me of him the way you did. But I miss him terribly, even after all these years. And that's no excuse for how I treated you." Her admission was more than I ever expected to hear. "Thank you for saying that. It helps to understand why. My therapist says I need to address the patterns I've created," she added, surprising me. She must have noticed my expression because she smiled slightly. "Yes, I've started therapy. Apparently, near financial ruin and a collapsing ceiling can motivate change." The weeks that followed brought gradual but meaningful changes. I received the promotion I had been working toward, complete with a substantial raise that allowed me to find my own apartment. I chose a sunny one-bedroom in a neighborhood I'd always admired. Moving from Tara's spare room to my own place felt ceremonial, a physical manifestation of independence. I carefully arranged my father's books on shelves, hung photos of happier times, and splurged on a comfortable reading chair like the one he had kept in his study. Meanwhile, Stephanie and Daniel moved into a small one-bedroom in a less desirable part of town. The transition was especially difficult for Stephanie, who sold many of her luxury possessions to pay debts. Daniel found steady work with my contractor friend, while Stephanie secured a position as a sales associate at a home decor store, a humbling but practical use of her design interests. Mom's health improved under the new arrangement. I managed her medical appointments from afar, while a weekly visiting nurse monitored her medications and vitals. She began taking a more active role in maintaining the house, learning many of the tasks I had handled for years.